In the previous video, Letecia told us a convoluted story about someone in a cape being hit with a gun on January 28th. After she stated it was Gannon, she showed no emotion but simply rolled along in her story. This picks up from there.
And so later on, when I sat down with my attorneys and we put it together and realized it, I didn't know until that point that it was Gannon's sin.
She figured this out with her attorneys, that it was Gannon standing on the bed, and she didn't know this until she figured it out with her attorneys. First of all, the cause of death was not a gunshot wound. Yes, he was shot, but according to the medical examiner, that wound would not have caused death. The cause of death was the severe head wounds from blunt force trauma, but the stab wounds would have caused death on their own as well. She accidentally shoots a person in a cape from inside the room, but not up close. She leaves to get a knife and a blunt object to then purposely make sure he's dead, but she doesn't recognize him? Oh, but she's not actually admitting that. She's just admitting to the shooting. The medical examiner said she believed the stab wounds came first, then the blunt force trauma to the head, and then the gunshot to his face. And about this cape, it was Gannon's blanket. The blanket so familiar to Letecia. A blanket that belonged in the house. Kids play with blankets like that, pretending they're wearing capes. If that's something Gannon did, that would be familiar to her too. It's an easy image to pull from her memory to inject into a story. But it also makes the scary caped person not so scary. The stab wounds were deep, not inflicted through a bundled blanket. I could go on and on with reasons why there's no way this happened, but you already know this didn't happen. She's on trial for murder, but doesn't know until this point it was Gannon on the bed? Did she not recognize him when she put him in the suitcase? This is utter nonsense. If there was even a hint of truth in it, there would be no trial, and Gannon would be alive, because when she did recognize him, she'd have called 911. In a previous interview, she'd said she has common sense, and if Gannon had been hurt by accident, she would have picked up the phone.
Prior to that, I thought the whole cape thing. We put it together over and over and over, and I'd sit and I'd cry with them. I did this with them, everything. The only thing that comes to my mind is that the way the cover was wrapped, that's what had to look like the cape, was the way that he had the cover wrapped around him.
Could someone with borderline personality disorder catch a glimpse of someone walking by wearing a blanket and mistake that for a cape? Sure. And in a different context, maybe somebody without borderline would have that thought too. But according to her own story, it was daytime. She followed the person into the room after having gone to the garage to get a gun out of her car. The story about Edgar having the gun is just her way of distancing herself. There was no Edgar there. And in this light of day, knowing Lena and Harley at least are in the house, she sees someone wrapped in what she's calling a cape, but is a thing very familiar to her. And her response is to shoot? No. And you can't even blame that on borderline personality. She wants everybody to focus on this caped figure. But there's a significant issue here that is completely ignored. If Gannon has been missing since the previous afternoon, gone all night, and the whole community is actively looking for him, why did no one see him return? If he'd been missing all night, is he just going to run around and play like normal? She might try to claim that he hid somewhere in the house all night long without needing food or drink or the bathroom. The whole hiding thing, thinking Gannon was hiding, the hiding challenge. Yes, he was hidden because she hid him. Of course, this story isn't true. Letecia killed him the previous day, the 27th, and moved his body on the very morning she's talking about now. But even if we didn't know that, none of this story hangs together.
They can think what they want, whatever about me. I never would purposely hurt Gannon or hurt anyone that I would have thought it would have been Gannon. Never in a million years, okay? Never. I've had these kids all over the country. If I was going to do something like that, it would be somewhere in another country. Like, come on, like, people who want to kill people do it because they want to take someone's life. That's not what happened.
Hold on. She skipped over a lot. All these people in the house, and no one came running after hearing a gunshot? She claims she would never purposely hurt Gannon. Previously, she said she didn't kill him, would never hurt him or harm him in any way. She pushed back hard on Agent Grusing when he suggested it could have been an accident. She said she didn't hurt Gannon on purpose or by accident. Now that she knows she can't get away with denial of the act, she's trying to deny the intent. Do you believe her? If it was not intentional, why not tell Agent Grusing when he gave her the chance? Oh, right, because she didn't know it was Gannon until now when she's standing trial. Didn't know it was Gannon when she hid his body, when she put him into the suitcase. And heck, even if it was somebody else she killed, why shove anybody into a suitcase? I've been all over the country with these kids. It's not exculpatory. It's not even explanatory. If I was going to do something like that, whenever an accused says that, my antenna go right up. And if she was going to kill somebody, she'd do it in another country? Oh, like maybe Mexico? Like maybe staging it so it looks like members of a Mexican drug cartel targeted this 11-year-old of all people? I'm referring to her here, claiming that Hispanic or dark-skinned men did this, and her Google searches on Mexican drug cartel members. She speaks of a singular motive for killers, being the wish to take someone's life, and how that's not what happened in her case. She's animated and emphatic here, wanting to convince them in respect to intent.
They paint me as this monster, and I did all these crazy things. I never once knew it was Gannon. I, in fact, didn't even know it was Gannon until later on. The reason I didn't is because Lena, I guess the noise woke Lena up. If you read the report, Lena told you that she helped carry Gannon's body.
She's still concerned about how she is perceived. In this statement, they said I did all these crazy things. She knows those things look crazy, and she doesn't want to be painted as a crazy monster. That may be part of the reason why her new story is not a straight up, I was psychotic and had no idea what I was doing, but it's, I was in protection mode, and it was a combination of self-defense and an accident. We know this bit about Lena carrying Gannon is not true. The evidence shows it's not true. But this element of the story is particularly sickening and cruel. She is implicating an innocent little girl as an accessory after the fact. This would be horrifying to Al and Landon. This serves the purpose of Letecia removing some of the blame from herself and placing it on the child. She can't take responsibility, even as she claims to be taking responsibility. She seems to be oblivious to the horror and abusiveness of the scenario she's describing, unaware that such an event would make her look like even more of a monster. This isn't insanity. It's psychopathy.
That report in her interview, she says on that Gannon's body's not moving. That's because she was there and she helped carry Gannon's body to the floor.
Lena didn't hear the gunshot? These other people in the house didn't hear this gunshot? But Lena did hear Gannon's body hit the floor? But he was on the bed and fell on the bed, according to this story. Gannon was already in the suitcase. So when you're imagining all this she's saying, imagine a fictional character, because it is a fictional character, not Gannon. She doesn't know it was Gannon until she looks under the covers. And look at the look she gives the interviewer, making sure she's got him. A minute ago, she said she didn't know it was Gannon until she spoke to her attorneys. Okay, she knows it's Gannon. So are we going to hear now how she attempted first aid and CPR? How she yelled for help? How she called 911? She did previously say she has the common sense to pick up the phone.
I couldn't get him up the stairs. I didn't even know it was Gannon at that time until I moved him up there.
She just said Harley and Lena went downstairs with some other people. Now she's saying Harley is asleep. Harley didn't hear the gunshot. Letecia doesn't holler for Harley to help or call 911, but instead directs an 8-year-old to haul a body up the stairs. And in all of Letecia's wild stories about how Gannon's blood ended up in the house, she never once mentioned an accidental gunshot. And speaking of blood, are we going to hear about having to throw away Lena's clothes or having her take a bath? This fiction is not even good. It's just cruel and self-serving. She really does herself in the next clip.
I lose it. Like, I am all over the place, like, screaming, crying. That's how Lena hears me. Lena's helping me. Now, Harley's still asleep. She hasn't woke up to any of this. It's a hard freak. Lena helps me tote Gannon up the stairs. I'm throwing up, like, blood, the side of him. Like, I literally don't think Gannon is still alive. Gannon is barely talking.
She describes throwing up. It's possible that during the actual homicide she did throw up or nearly throw up. That happens more often than you might think when a killer has to contend with the body. If she threw up or felt sick, it wasn't during the time of this story, because this story didn't happen. When she says Gannon is still alive, I think she's referencing the actual crime. I think it was harder than she expected to kill him. Let's play make-believe with Letecia. Let's pretend we believe her story here. She accidentally shot him, and now they're hauling him up the stairs. At this point in her story, she's aware she has a seriously injured boy. She's aware of where she is and what she's doing. So aware, in fact, that the scene is making her throw up. She's aware of Lena. Gannon is alive. Not only that, his level of consciousness is such that he can talk. Barely, but he can talk. If the very next step here is not to call 911, then Letecia is still guilty, according to her own story. She's fully aware the person is alive, the person over which she has control and to whom she has a duty of care is so gravely injured that a reasonable person could reasonably foresee that failure to get immediate medical care will likely result in death. Now, I'm not getting that from Colorado law, but that's the general concept here that shows she intended his death, or was at the very least reckless, according to her story. The evidence of what actually happened proves first degree. I'm trying to point out the mental element here that is directly contradictory to ideas of psychosis, accident, and self-defense. Even if her lie was true, she still proves herself a killer with intent, with capacity. But the story's not true.
We try to get him up steps, which we did. We take him upstairs. I'm like all over the place. We get out the garage, go to the car, and I blink out. Because at this point, I think I was in complete and utter shock. And I know I'm throwing up because I see all this later. So when I tell you I know I'm doing something, I sit back and written time and figure this out because I was just on it. I remember being in the car on the passenger side, and we were taking Gannon to the hospital.
She doesn't remember how they got him up the stairs because she doesn't want to be asked any details. And it conveniently bolsters her insanity claims, or so she thinks. She knows if anyone asks for details, she's going to trip up again. She can't get a solid picture in her mind of her and an 8-year-old carrying him out and getting him into the seat of the car. She can't come up with that picture because she doesn't know what that would be like, because she carried him up in a suitcase and put him in the trunk. He was never in the passenger side of the Tiguan. Given the amount of blood at the scene, indicating the severity of injury, a live person whose heart is still pumping blood would have left a huge amount of blood in the passenger seat. That would have saturated the seat to an extent it would have been impossible to get it out. So that didn't happen. She claims she and the 8-year-old were taking Gannon to the hospital. I remind you again, she told Agent Grusing she has common sense and would pick up the phone if there'd been an accident. But it was not an accident. And it was planned for that window of opportunity when only she and Gannon were home.
But I was on the passenger side, okay? Now my leg's bleeding, which, if you look at the footage from the hospital, you can see where I got hit with a bullet, okay? So my leg's bleeding. And that's probably why there was a little bit of my blood on the car.
This is the first we've heard her leg is bleeding. She did say earlier that the gun hit her leg. She stops her story to offer absent proof. I talked about this in another video. She tells them, if you look at the footage from the hospital, you'll see. Let's talk about this for a second. Because this sounds crackers, considering there's no hospital footage of her with bullet wounds. And notice when she talks about it, she holds her abdominal area and not her leg. If you didn't know anything about her, you might think she's out of touch with reality. I mean, she'd have to be, right? It's crazy to tell such a wild story that is so easily disproven. But you do know her history. She has offered absent proof in the past. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, it's when a person says, if you don't believe me, ask so-and-so, or go check this thing. But the person is not in a position to check right away, or the thing would be a big pain in the butt to check. And so the person doesn't bother to check. Especially when other things the liar has said do turn out to be true. Because the liar is practiced enough to pad their lies with bits of truth. And here there's so much footage, and getting hospital footage would be a challenge if it was possible at all years later. And the purpose of this interview is not investigative. You get the idea. Letecia did this with Al and Landon. I suspect she did it with her employer. They were pushing her to give them paperwork she'd promised, and her job was at risk at the time of the homicide. But Al didn't know that yet, and she couldn't tell him. And she was trying to figure out what to do about that because that job was going to be gone. She contacted a reporter and wanted to talk to Nancy Grace to show them polygraph results, a fake polygraph report that even she hadn't obtained yet. She confidently told Agent Grusing to go look at security footage. Not smart to play this game with the FBI. But she's so accustomed to getting away with it, she fully expected she'd skate free again. But the FBI did check. And when Agent Grusing told her that, you could have knocked her over with a puff of air. Her degrees came from an internet site. But it looks like nobody checked until it came up just this week at trial. I would bet that she has done this her whole life, constantly lying, then telling more lies to cover her old lies, and then running when she can't cover them anymore. She has a pattern of this behavior. It's lying and conning, not insanity. Remember the magic gun in one of her previous stories? The gun she didn't walk downstairs with? Well, now there are magic bullets. Her story is that she tried to grab the gun from Edgar. We know there was no Edgar. And we know Edgar is not an alternate personality. Edgar is something she made up to avoid taking responsibility for bringing the gun into the room. According to her own story, she grabbed the gun and both she and Gannon got hit. How long are her arms? Because that bullet would have had to go through her leg first, from the front of her leg or the back. Then it would have to travel upward toward the corner of the room and go high enough to strike the jaw of the person standing on top of the bed. Oh, but wait! At some point, it also has to go through a pillow, yes?
I don't know at this point. I don't know if she went back in the regular party. I don't know anything because I remember waking back up in the car and being like, there's no palm trees. Now, you say, what is palm trees? In South Carolina, when you go to the hospital and those palm trees, it's on the Grand Strand. That's why it's called Grand Strand. The beach, and then there's palm trees. I didn't see any palm trees when we were in the car, so I didn't think I was on the right road. But I was in the passenger seat, not in the driver's seat. Next thing I know, when I wake back up, I hear a loud noise, like a howling noise, like a noise, and it reminds me of like when my grandpa died, and he made like this noise. That was the noise I heard. But I wake back up and I'm in the garage, in the car. Now we look at camera footage and my car does go out. 5 minutes.
Waking back up and palm trees, claiming she's in the passenger seat. So she's saying she's dissociated. And she's telling that she's driven somewhere while dissociated. She hears a howling noise and interjects that it's the same noise her grandfather made at death. She immediately gets back on topic here, though, and what she just interjected was directly relevant to what she's saying about the noise. In the seconds when she's describing the noise itself, she's showing indicators of truthfulness. But just as she begins to say, "But I wake back up in the garage," she looks at the interviewer and holds eye contact as she says it, and she gives him the eyebrow flash. And here we know she didn't wake up in the garage. Besides, she already woke up and now she's waking up again. She said, but she woke up in the garage. It sounds like she really heard a death sound, but the rest of it is self-serving. She has woke up in the garage and the car and again brings up footage. She has access to all the discovery and knows that there's footage of her driving out early in the morning. She has no choice but to admit to this. Remember how she Googled how to fake security footage? She doesn't truly admit it. She doesn't take responsibility. She describes what they'll see on the footage instead of saying I drove. She doesn't even claim an alternate personality drove. She simply doesn't admit anything. Rather, merely describes footage. And even lies about that. She says the footage shows her gone for only 5 minutes. But that's not the case. Her vehicle was tracked to the S-curve and back. Investigators recognized that that trip should have been several minutes shorter. She had stopped the car. That's what led them to search the area at the S-curve where they found the evidence. Letecia earlier said, I didn't drive my car. It was in park all morning. And I drove the car but came right back. In her interview with detectives early on, she volunteered the information that her phone tracks her everywhere and that she drove down the street, but right back. It was an odd statement, but there was so much going on and so many odd statements that it was just another on the pile. In short, what she has been telegraphing over and over is how she moved Gannon's body. Like she said, Eduardo took a suitcase, how she didn't go downstairs with a gun, how Gannon was hiding when it was she who hit him. To summarize, she woke up more than once. The footage shows the car moving. 5 minutes. Translation. She'd put the suitcase at the S-curve. She drove to get it and bring it back and leave it in her trunk to take to the airport. She will not take responsibility. And notice, she's gone off the topic of the death noise.
So leave the neighborhood. So what we put together is that it must have been when I went out in the car hearing the noise, that must have been when Gannon took his last breath, and I was still out of it.
We went out of the neighborhood. So Gannon in the passenger seat going to the hospital? And is Lena there? Lena may have disappeared. I suspect Lena has served her purpose in the story, so is no longer necessary. It was simply a construction, a fabrication for Letecia to avoid responsibility in her own mind, as well as under the law. We put together, I take it that's her legal team, that when I went out to the car, notice first person singular now, and heard the noise, that must have been when Gannon took his last breath. How gutting and horrific this must have been for Landon and Al to have to hear this in court. And Letecia says, I was still out of it. She woke up several times already, but now she's still out of it. Even constructing the story so that Gannon takes his last breath when she's not directly interacting with him is another way for her to distance from what she's done. She says, I was still out of it in spite of waking up several times already, but now she's still out of it. It's all to avoid responsibility. And this is consistent with her personality, her pattern of behavior and thinking of not taking responsibility. Let me repeat some key words I just said. Consistent, pattern of behavior, pattern of thinking.
Go back in and park the car. Or come back to until Lena came back outside to the car. And Lena's asking what's going on, what's everything. I go in the house. Harley's face, Lena's face, they're all just like white, like they've seen a ghost. Like they don't even know what's going on. Grief, like the whole world.
Again, this idea of coming back to. It appears Lena and Harley are wondering what the heck is going on, but this is Letecia telling the story, so who knows. She mentions police, but nothing specific. We know that's important to her. It's not only that she mentions the word police and then doesn't talk about it. It's also because earlier she said when Al sent the police for a well-being check, that's when she became very scared. Listen, if my kid goes missing, I want the police. All of them. Send everybody. And you want to come and see how I'm doing? Gee, that's really nice. Scared would not be the reaction. But we know why she was scared. And she's thrown out the word police because their presence in the face of her culpability was highly stressful for her. This fear of police, this fear of the real Harley and Lena looking at her, and Letecia wondering but not knowing what questions they all have in their minds, what people think, is frightening. Note the mention of white faces. I suggest it was Letecia who was white-faced. And why all the fear? Consciousness of guilt. What's missing here? Where's Gannon? She was supposedly driving him to the hospital. He was in a passenger seat in the car, and she supposedly arrived at the hospital, although she never actually says that, just that there's hospital footage of her with a bullet wound. No mention of Gannon at the hospital. And if she took him to the hospital, why didn't she stay there with him? It's because she wants us to believe she was on her way to do the right thing and dissociated along the way. Okay, let's say that happened. It didn't. She's playing a game, but okay. When she comes back to, why does she not ask where Gannon is? Why doesn't she say, he was just here and I was taking him to the hospital. Where did he go? Did she call the hospital to ask how he is? Does she call the police and say she found him and he's at the hospital? No. She knows she didn't take him there. She knows where she put him.
As if this ain't really going on. Like, there is no way this happened. Like, there's nothing wrong, y'all. Everything's fine. He's going to be fine. He's going to be home. That's when I started going through, like, all the motions of, going to go get this part. Because to me, it wasn't really going on. Like, this was, you can't even compare this to a nightmare. To have gone through that.
She's going through denial, which is a normal response. Notice she describes going through the motions. Again, a common description, but she doesn't go out of it in response. No helpful alter takes over. No. She seems to have a basic idea of what DID might look like, but hasn't fully done her research yet and hasn't practiced enough. Her statement about all this being a nightmare for her, she's talking about how she killed him, how she concealed it, and how she's worried about getting caught, and it's a nightmare for her. Well, that set off a big mushroom cloud in my head.
You go wash out your brain with something good, and after I hug Watson, I'll work on the next video.